So good evening, my dear friends. So hello, those of you who I have the honor really to see first time. So thank you, Katja, for your benevolent introduction, sorry. So for me really to work out my presentation in the correct way, any one of you really who's been attending to my previous presentation next door, so 30-40% in the audience, so those of you who've been able really to listen to myself, sorry for short repetitions. I will try really to do it a different way, and for the rest of the audience I think it will be really brand new information with some repetitions for those of you who manage really to listen to it again. So let us switch it in. So my dear friends, I was asked really to communicate with you about innovations in medicine and oncology in healthcare. Just because we've been proactively carrying on with a brand new R&D in cancer disease. And just like the previous audience, my message to you that video is streaming here, and also we do our own video as well on our own in-house site TV channel. So site TV channel is where the research programs are performed. So we've got two achievements. It's not kind of promotion but briefing for you. So two things that we've performed. So I will keep my papers here. So really the leaflets with the contact details. So we've got our small flyer with what we do, so address and contact details, telephones and web resources, and actually a business card of the web resource site TV. Something that I won't have really enough time really to talk you through is really reflected there as the video presentations, so regular presentations. So if I manage really to strike some interest of you, so you feel free really not to take it down. So it will be streamed over, and now let's get down to the gist of the matter. So this idea has been prompted by Ekaterina Alexandrovna, a system, self-contained system inside a system. I would like really to refer to this name, so I'm very glad really to check out what type of audience we have had in our school. As I understand, many managers of healthcare, many healthcare administrators, so perhaps something might be interesting for you in this respect. So I will quickly skim over a number of slides from the previous audience. Let me actually not read everything, save for time saving, but the number of issues that we've been discussing. So next door, my questions to my answers to these questions actually. So the quickest and fastest developing clinical specialization is oncology, and proof is actually that the number of international research and clinical trials, so 18 to 20%, so of the total number of clinical trials world over. So 1 of 100 medical specializations is oncology, 1%. So the society is trying really to work out what it takes really to have a quick treatment of cancer. So the answer here is simple. So which staging is eligible, how quick can you detect it, and how well advanced? So opportunity of treating cancer diseases available. So is it possible really to fight cancer successfully? And you as the reps of the medical community know that we have really to stand by fighting cancer, and we have really to do so medical checkups for prevention and prophylaxis, and we need really to improve screening and so on. The point is really to get access to the state-of-the-art methods of treatment and so on. What does it really take to prove efficacy? So to get access to the state-of-the-art methods of treatment. So the answer is pretty simple, but it's not working it out. Can I have some assistance from you, Vitalik? So what does it take really to prove efficacy in the clinical technology? Yes. So whilst we are busy with it, so it takes you very simple really how to provide proof by means of clinical trials of the brand new treatment methods. That is about really international scientific program that compares a number of options, usually two different methods of treatment. So based on the on the internationally acknowledged, recognized standards, ICH GCP, International Conference of Harmonization, Good Clinical Practice. So these are for human trials, valid, and so on. So in your audience, my message to you is actually, I really believe that this type of activity has been regulated in the legislation globally, because a misconception about the fact that the clinical trials only performed in the poorer countries is a myth, and fortunately 70% of international programs are performed in the US, UK involved in 65% of clinical trials, Ukraine 2 to 3% of clinical trials. So the issue is really to make sure that this country should be more innovative in its development to facilitate access to the state-of-the-art clinical technologies for treatment, and it's very important really to secure appropriate legislation for it, and I've been engaged in it for the recent 15 years, and I can really vouchsafe to you that they are perfectly legitimate. So some might have said a different opinion, some really things depend on personalities and some on the systems. Those people who violate rules in their performance will be short-lived in a certain activity. So I've got in as a message really to tell you that we need really to work correctly, legitimately, accurately, and it will work out normal. So no other option is possible. So we have really to investigate the technology of treatment. Vitaly, any news on the presentation? Technology-wise, yeah, it's already on the screen. So thank you. So what does it take really to prove efficacy of clinical technology? Because evidence-based medicine, so you have heard this concept. It's pretty simple really to be able to prove how one technology works out, one medicinal product. You have really to compare it with the best practice or with the best golden standard available worldwide. So clinical trial, according to its intention, is about really comparison of the best comparative technology available nowadays. I will let you know why it is necessary, and now please take it for granted that this information might come in handy for you with the subsequent feedback on my behalf to tell you why. Of an utmost importance for Ukraine is the fact that inside the clinical trials, the case is compared to the international standard. So access to this standard is very hard to get because of high expenses. Those people who are busy doing innovations in this audience, they can be sure really to tell you that clinical trials are bound really to facilitate you access to the state-of-the-art treatment technologies, and evidence-based medicine is about the fact that a clinical trial based on some retrieved statistical data. Whenever we speak about oncology, we have the total survival, overall survival, because for oncology it's crucial to make sure that the people should have overall survival. And in English, this is a parameter that allows really to do measurements. So if the people really have longer, life expectancy is better. And how many adverse events or complications in the course of the treatment, it must be likewise assessed in the clinical trial, to find out if the efficacy and safety of the treatment can be comparable. So this is something that should be assessed in the course of the clinical trials. So what do we know about this type of activity, and how many of it is is performed. So because I've said really most of these programs performed in the Western countries, and 2 to 3% Ukraine's engagement, and 4-8 times smaller than the Polish benchmarking and the European benchmark. So in the previous lecture I was saying that I'm sure that if you could only succeed in the arrangements of the logistics and staff training involved in clinical trials, so to achieve the benchmark of Germany or France, if only our clinics, our centers, our health facilities, our staff so would have been ready, so you should be really striving for it, and I'm sure that it is achievable. So what type of benefits could we get from it then? So I'm just sure to say that if we could succeed that benchmarking level, so we could have really benefited it with so many cancer treatment programs with such a wealth of medicinal products and indications for these programs that we could really target very widespread and prevalent, very severe oncology in a very wide range, thanks really to the clinical trials. Because the word to say treat, I would like really to correct. So it's really for you really to instill the understanding of logics. So clinical trials is a research and development. So in clinical science and medicine, just like people really writing thesis is about a clinical trial. So whenever an individual who is involved in regulatory, so professor, because now you've been saying incorrect things. Treatment, I would like really to correct myself. Based on regulatory principles, this is not treatment, but research, scientific research involving technologies, know-hows that are by default are better or the best, or the control golden standard group or the investigational group could enable something that this golden standard can surpass. And I'm totally responsible in my statement to you that if you want really to tread this way, so we'll end up having a whole plethora of technologies and state-of-the-art know-hows that are so in high demand by the general public. So you can have a different wingspan. So 2 to 3 investigators, very amateur investigators really do something surreptitiously and perform a team of 3 to 5 specialist clinical trials, and they keep it to themselves. So it can happen. This is true. Really to raise some funds, and if you are above board and true enough, so you will pay tax. And it is very important, and it should be correctly arranged. So logistics should be accurate with tax payment, and also you need really to cover expenses of the state-run facilities. And there is yet another approach. So in our understanding, because I said that it should be just the way it should be, because we are elaborating in our approach, because we've tried really to establish a powerful scientific research center, and I am in charge of academic department, at the Medical Academy. So our intention was really to find out if we could really establish a powerful scientific research medical center. Now it's been established with 100 staff. It performs more than 50 clinical trials, whose treatment concentrates on 12 disease areas, which is now important for Ukraine. What type of disease area for Ukraine, and how large a range of investigations can we concentrate on? Colorectal, oncology, virtually all the cancers. We can really cover a pretty high number of indications. And which is why the terminology, if you want really to approach it, so far as the logistics is concerned, yes, of course, it's scientific research, but within this framework, you can revise your ideas to find out because really, so for instance, 300 cancer patients under treatment, reimbursement was out for discussion yesterday. So in the clinic, we have really as many as 300 patients under treatment, thanks to the fact that the clinic has concluded 308 clinical trials contracts in oncology. So over the recent 15 years, Alexei Konstantin Chebanov, he is Ukrainian doctor, physician, clinician of merit. So my colleague and my dear friend, to whom I very much appreciate. He is the only clinician in Ukraine who has signed off more than 300 clinical trials contracts over the recent years. Why did he do it? Because he kind of got himself instilled with the thought that it is correct, accurate, and so much in demand. So by the patients, by the society, by the state, and for the sake of science. And we find it interesting, so the people busy at work, you can say that you do promotion of your own ideas and your own intentions. So today we are healthy, overnight we can be patient, so because we've got many different people around us. And the question is, what does it take really to opt for the right chance to get access to the cancer disease treatment? So my answer is actually you should really be looking for the innovative technologies, but they're high cost, and so lack of affordability in this country makes this issue pretty much challenging. The availability of those technologies inherent to the clinical trials for the highly developed countries of the world is a major challenge too, because in US they made a rule. So if a patient case is over than $100,000 per year treatment, and it is comparable to the cost of hemodialysis, it shouldn't be performed. It's too much innovative. It shouldn't be sustained. But across time, innovations will lose in value, and something that is not affordable today might be cheaper tomorrow. But a well-developed healthcare system will keep a good count of money. $100,000 is the limit. Actually, our patients really, in Ukraine, really, who get access to treatment in our clinic, really, go beyond this threshold of treatment. This is in the resource restrained environment setting. So why don't we do our dream work? So if you could only succeed in developing that network of the state-of-the-art research centers, comparable to that, in the other countries, so we could succeed really in treating cancer diseases without any funds from the state budget. We were talking about reimbursement, and it's possible really to make sure that we couldn't really incur any money from the state budget. So because it's covered really by the companies. Why didn't we have this knowledge before? I think many of you have known about it previously. Okay, let's check out what's the other item in the slide. So just because I was preparing this slide, next door I will speed it up. So what does it take really to prove efficacy of the technology? What is evidence-based medicine? What is clinical trial? And what is negatively impactful on the inclusion of patients in clinical trials? So we have technology, we have the people who have demand for it, and unfortunately 80% of the trials really finish with the fact that the health facilities fail really to comply with their own obligations. So we have lack of these clinical centers, and sometimes our efficient performance. When it is possible and when it is necessary to have efficient performance, because I managed really to explain to you why. Why should I care for it? So because I do it, it's my business, and why should you care about it? Because any one of us can make a patient. Why do we need it as the managers and professionals? Can I really read it out for you? I think it's true and not just far-fetched words. Because I've been really telling you, so the figures, so US, Europe, and Ukraine, Joe Biden, so a well-known vice president of US, and last year in Chicago when he was at ASCI Congress, so addressing the American oncologists, he made a statement that made many of them really so give an appropriate response to. So 40,000 researchers. So this community includes, he told the following message. So we want you. So the world is looking at you and really hoping that you will change the world. So, and that statement was very pathetic, addressing the oncologists, just because in US very high ambitious agenda to achieve so cure, to find out a cure for cancer diseases, and Biden's son died because of brain tumor at the age of 44 last year. So unfortunately, oncology is incurable despite the state-of-the-art innovations, and this is the action plan. So whenever I'm really meeting policymakers, politicians, so they sheikhs and presidents come to see me asking questions, so in private conversations, so asking me questions. Do you have any hope really to treat, to cure cancer in your land? And that is why the US made this moonshoot initiative. So that means shooting really to the moon, because in 1969 US made a plan really to fly off to the moon, and now their action plan is really to make sure that cancer diseases should be curable. So this is really the action plan. And so this was really a preface to say that this type is so much in demand and necessarily so. I won't be talking too much details, but so far as the failures and successes are concerned, because around us there might be some research, so with a lot of failures, and the failure is about the fact that the country is losing its possibilities, opportunities, so the companies might be showing that back to the country, and fortunately they don't do it. So Ukraine is included in the first 20 countries for clinical trials. Why do we have failure? Just because people have some prejudice. So the medical professionals might have their prejudice, and the clinicians might be guided by some profitable interests. And number 4 is really get people access to the data, because the people should have their own discretion whether you need it or not. It is not so our judgment. Give them access to objective data, so but by means of the fact that we know it ourselves. So if you want really about investment attractiveness, because I've been speaking about this chief clinician, so pretty atypical situation, because here with, so whenever we speak about reform, healthcare reform, and every now and then we are talking about pecuniary reform, so what does it take really to have better money allocation and so on. So my deep conviction is that it's good and correct. But my dear friends, I think that the cardinal reform will take place if each clinician will strive really to perform as high professional when they have really very severe incentives, and the surgeon so provides performance the way they can perform. And this is really rubbish that they underperformed. This is rubbish because they perform so within their qualifications, whatever they have access. This is the question. And so the surgeon really, after many years career, will not underperform. So training, number 1. Number 2, training plus affordability or accessibility of the state-of-the-art technologies. If you speak about oncology, unfortunately, if you speak about medications for treatment of malign tumors, there is no other way other than enrollment into clinical trials so as really to attract state-of-the-art technology in this land. So, and full stop. And from the other hand, absolutely, if you can do it, so you will be able really to put Ukraine into a totally different stance. You shouldn't really try to churn out the money from the cabinet of ministers. If you have national programs in place and they are not performed, so you should do correctly. And this is why I'm appealing to you about that. So, concise figures for your attention. So, overview of my clinical facility. Our achievements to date, so we've participated in more than 300 clinical trials and efficacy of more than 400 cancer drugs being researched. My inception in oncology, so at the time when 10 or 15 so cancer drugs were available, now 400 cancer drugs being investigated. And now the staff of our clinics have a tremendous experience. So, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able really to have a taste of it. So, they're training in 35 countries of the world and 239 publications to date abroad. And so, this statistic really is the highest cited. So, among the other scientific publications, it's about statistics that I've been ready to tell you in the other audience. So that means clinical trials publications really are the highest innovative, are the highest desired, expected, and highest cited. Breakthrough therapy, so drug available in US, and so that's been authorized by the FDA. That is very severe in its inspections, because a month ago, so we had 5-day-long inspection by the FDA in our facility a month ago. When you go together in your development with such renowned partners, it is a very important boost for your development. So extorting money and so on, it should be really taken out from your mindset, because so the international partners will not come over to your place.
So let's go on. A rather important moment here is that the clinic participating in the study must do everything possible to ensure safety for your patients. There is a whole set of measures to be taken. I will not go too deep into that, but you need to make sure that treatment is safe. This is definitely not the guaranteed safety, because this is not the Swiss bank. You can provide a guarantee for safety, but you need to ensure that you take all the necessary measures, which are quite well depicted in the informed consent form for the patient that he needs to learn about and sign. I actually talked about the role of a manager of the clinic previously, and I was talking about the experience of our clinic, and now I can tell you the following. Dear friends, these two lines basically of my slide, these are the key points. Many of you are actually the clinical managers, you are the authorities. If you do not believe into that, nothing will happen, because you guys must trust this information, because you are the people here who can resolve that problem, and this is quite true. And to continue with, especially when you talk about the healthcare facilities and the clinical trials, should you participate or not in the clinical trials? I know many people who say, no, I do not want to have problems. What would be the problems? I don't want to say. I know why you don't want to talk about that. There are no any direct interests in that. There is no payback, there is no kickback here. Basically, you just need to do the job and implement it, but there is no other way to success, basically. And I'm quite sure that the risks, well, there is one risk here, actually, is to do your job improperly, to build your work improperly. Look into account Mercedes production, for example. They have organized their work, and everyone knows and loves that brand. There is only one risk, not to stick to the rules, because the main rule here would be never lie. What we do, if you look into the aircraft production, for example, it takes as much as 10 years to do the final work to actually make that aircraft become really the one that is quite widely sold, and still it needs to be finalized properly. How do you actually develop the correct business model of your clinic? We have actually staff at the chair, we have staff in the medical academy, we have staff in the hospital. We have a whole series of people who have the status of entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs. We also have the so-called SMO business model, which is responsible for this business activity, because neither the chair nor the academy nor the hospital will be able to ensure that high level of quality, because there are no business-like people in the hospital who will operate the data input into the data bases, for example, and the medical academy is not entitled to do the treatment activity, because that treatment activity mandate stays within the clinical hospital, right? Right, and this kind of combination makes you successful. In order to do so, you definitely need to properly sign the contracts. One of the steps on signing properly the contracts is that you need to be quite ready to the fact this can be external economic type contracts, this may be local contracts. You must remember that the value-added tax is not actually included into that notion of external economic contracts, but the local vendors and the local contracts do include the VAT tax. You must know what is actually the site for your service provision, because the end user of your service, if that is the organization of the service, which is outside the customs area of Ukraine, then this becomes the expert of your services. In such a case, if this is the clinical trial, as you operate with the clinical data, which is available on the databases, shared databases that go to Europe, to US, they actually belong to international companies. That is actually the external economic activity you must be aware of and you must not forget. And basically, the process of trial takes place within the country, within the hospital and the healthcare facility. Another important issue as you do the trials, what a physician will ask you in the first place is actually give me the medical and ethics commission assessment report, because this is their responsibility. This is not the ones that sticks with the ethical requirements, it cannot be done. I have been asked about placebo-controlled trials. We have had 4 to 5 placebo-controlled trials. What does that actually mean? These were the pure placebo-controlled trials. That means one patient is on treatment as an intervention, investigational product, the next would get the placebo. Not many trials like that we have had. Some may say, no, it's something like up to 90% of such placebo-controlled trials. No, dear ladies and gentlemen, no. In some situations, most often that we see, one of the patients would get 2 drugs. Let's rephrase it. A patient would get 3 drugs, 2 would have the active ingredient included, and 1 would have a placebo. This would be really the golden standard, which is currently used. This is a kind of masked placebo-controlled trial. The other group would get 2 drugs, and this is a placebo, double placebo-controlled trials, which actually gives you the comparison of 2 to 3 drugs. And this is a rather innovative approach, I would say, to verify if 3 is better than 2 drugs. And the physicians are not quite aware about that, because this is the blind kind of clinical trial. This is why when you talk about 2 plus 1, 1 is placebo, this is not the pure placebo trial, so to say. We have had a 4th grade of melanoma case, 3rd treatment course. Basically, that would be a situation when there was no other choice. They would have 1 course of treatment, a 2nd course of treatment. It was not successful, and the disease would go on, actually. This would be a kind of a drug support therapy in such a case. And this would be a kind of a placebo-controlled or best supportive care approach in such a case. That is why I would like you, actually, to understand better that situation related to placebo. And now, many people might say, like, okay, you can actually cooperate with the higher educational facility and in combination with the healthcare facilities. And actually, the customs facilities, the customs authorities and police authorities may come up to you asking what would be the contract between you guys and what would be the difference. And I can give you a couple of hints. The treatment of patients will take place in the healthcare facility, basically in the hospital. The hospital provides you the premises, because the chair in the medical university does not provide the premises because they have the license and mandate for research and education. Treatment in such a case would be the prerogative to a hospital. Storage of drugs, pharmacy, the medical university should not have actually the pharmacy in their premises. It needs to be depicted, well depicted in the documents. Keeping the records. This should also be included into the contract. And here, the educational facility, higher educational facility, would provide you with additional staff. It would provide you with input and processing of data and the results analysis. This would be the good platform for your future success. Another important issue is that I pay quite a lot of attention to very strong requirements from the regulatory framework. I know quite many. And I would like to repeat you that you should not violate the regulations in principle, and especially it is true for the clinical trials. That is why the question here would be, I told you about 100 of my staff. It is not easy actually to find employment for these people because everyone has his position, everyone has his payroll, etc. What we do is actually we have the administrative unit in the hospital. We also have possibility for cooperation between the academy and the hospital. The hospital would get, the academy would get additional payment for their research and development, which makes us look for additional positions that can enable us to earn that money. And I want to reassure you, this is the type of business activity where you do not ask for money from the state budget, from the governmental budget. You can attract additional investment, you can establish new positions and increase your workload, making your hospital more attractive for the new clinical trials and further investment. This is the capacity that you might get with the use of clinical trials as of today. But even that number of people would not be enough for you to have up to 50 trials simultaneously. You should have even more capacity in terms of your staff. Should you have about 3 dozens of sites like that, we would be able to cover the whole oncology problem for Ukraine. And should we take the track like they do it in US and European countries, we would be able to get the absolutely different spectrum of activity in Ukraine without reimbursement, without any governmental expenditures. It would only cost us some movement from our side, some motion, and our mind and brain activity. So what we did, we looked into the role of SMO, and we created and established the RDP company. This is the one that is doing research and development program support. This is the one that provides investment. We have organized laboratory, CT. We have provided investment into the hospital. And basically the Minister of Health, on behalf of the country, on behalf of the state, told us, like, you need to bring that investment into your clinic, into your hospital. And it made it possible to operate. Another interesting moment, I have not covered that in my previous presentation, that would be the rule of 5 to 95. I invented that myself. Quite many people say, like, what are these individual entrepreneurs in the medical academies? Like, who are these poor people? You remember that Mimino movie? So what are these actually entrepreneurs? And I would like to tell you the following. The clinical trial that is conducted, it is conducted by the group of researchers. According to the contract, you need to manage the patient during the whole course of treatment, during the whole course of trial. And this might take as long as 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years sometimes. And we need actually to manage that patient. We need to observe the patient. and monitor that patient. And a patient might get in the clinic for a couple of days, but the rest of the time would stay at home. Who would follow that patient? Who would monitor that patient? And that is actually the rule we developed. Everyone who is engaged into trial will get the individual entrepreneurship status. Within his entrepreneurship status, he would be able to do the data collection, data processing, not according to the medical canons, because for that purpose you would need to have the license, because should something happen to the patient, he, as being a physician, he should refer immediately the patient to the clinic. And here, 95% of time, the physicians, as well as the support staff and data managers, they spend to collect data, because it is important for the company involved into the trial that we do not only the research, investigational treatment of a patient, but they want us actually to follow and monitor very carefully of what is actually happening to the patient. They would like us to collect the data, to make it reliable, to make it accurate. This is what makes it valuable for the clinical trial. And I want to tell you, this is why we have these individual entrepreneurs available. And they, for that purpose, they can get the proper payment. And this is what we talk about as we communicate to the tax office, etc. And definitely one absolutely important issue is actually pay all the taxes. That makes you be sincere and trustful. If you don't do that, our foreign partners, should they know about that tax-related problems, they will step by step get rid of such a partner who doesn't pay the taxes. That is why you need to stick to the rules. This is what I want to reiterate again. It seemed like I have pushed the wrong button here, so everything is over here. It's just every time you touch upon that police related issues, everything is over immediately. And then there is a question: what clinical trials can you perform? You can cover as many as 300 patients, and you can attract as half a million of US dollar investment per month, which is quite a large number of money, I would say. But for that, you need to have adequate management of your clinical trials. This is what we have been doing for the last 5 years. We have developed the program for trials management of trials. Because I'm just a bit pressed for time, I will touch upon some issues and I will not touch upon the others. But this is actually the site TV. .net, which is our internet web-based resource. We also have a YouTube channel. Everything we talk about, everything we do, we actually record that, we post that. And our understanding is that should people be interested in that, they need to have a chance to look into that and watch that. We can tell you the way we organize the business management, what are the processes organized. We all have short videos about that on YouTube. Should this be interesting or useful for you, or should it be touchy to you, go on sitetv.net. There is also a YouTube link. You can go on YouTube and you can watch what is available on YouTube as well. Should we have some time, we can actually show you. Some people say you should not promote yourself, but on the other hand, you should not keep silence, because we were told already by the previous group, like, why would you keep silence, guys? Nobody knows about you. And you know why we did keep silence? Is that we didn't want actually to absorb that negativism from the social networks, because whatever I talk about, whatever you put down, whatever you post, people will eventually tell you, like, many people will tell eventually that these are bad guys. And I showed an example in that previous conference room that I agreed to follow with our information policy in our clinical trials of what we actually perform just a couple of weeks ago, and we have actually recorded a lot of information. We posted that on YouTube, and then at some point we stopped. Some people say it was not the best idea, and maybe it was not, in fact, but every one of us is pretty sensitive at some point. I know you guys have very strong, so to say, years, so you can sustain all that negativism for quite a long period of time. And there were two moments actually that made me go back to our information campaign, and I recommend you actually to visit our web platforms that we use. There were cases when we would come across a situation when the patients would be looking for the medicines, and because they have already spent all the available resources, and at some point I realized there were actually clinical trials according to their condition, according to their disease, which actually meant that patients, if had a chance actually to come and be enrolled into the program, they would get that level of care and even better level of treatment in a clinical trial program. But be aware, I want to reiterate, you don't have to pay a single peanut actually if you participate in the clinical trial program, neither for the CT nor for the full panel of testing, nor for immune biological and molecular testing, which might be sent for further confirmation to the leading laboratories in Europe and the United States. That would be one of the good options. 5 minutes to go, right? Okay. I'm gonna make it even faster. So here we see process of signing the patient informed consent form. You need to tell to the patient clearly and in an understandable way what is going to happen to the patient, what needs to be discussed, like safety-related issues, adverse events, insurance, and even transportation-related issues, because the patient needs to be transported to the clinic. Quite often he would get his transport reimbursement, so to say. In some programs, he's also reimbursed on his food. So to say, should a patient go from Kiev to Dnipro and stay on chemotherapy for 1 month, he would get his reimbursement for hotel stay, for hotel accommodation. In some regions, it is available, dear colleagues. The structure of our research center, there is a lot of information on that on scitetv.net. We need to have the proper staff. We need to have definitely the pharmacists available and the medical nurses, data managers, laboratory, CT available, IT group, the development group, and other support staff, so to say. This is actually the center. This is the structure that should and must make you make your job properly. We have developed the program for trial management, and we would like in the nearest future actually to bring it to market. We have named it, we have entitled at the investigator software. This would include all types of planning, control over the performance, the full-fledged reporting. I actually have, through my mobile phone, I have complete access, continuous access to the test results everywhere, every time, at all, in every place, in any time. You should know also how to cooperate with sponsor, how to cooperate with their insurance companies. This is another important issue for cooperation. Safety of a patient and the quality of data. There are some principles that have been developed how to ensure that issues. You must also know how to do the monitoring, clinical audits, inspections, what should be your cooperation with the FDA. We have actually recently shot about a short movie about our cooperation and experience of cooperation with the FDA. You need to know what are the high level of citation index, what are the Google Scholar ratings, what are the ratings for the scholars. I have actually I could never thought a couple of years ago that I would have 239 publications in the foreign medical journals. Because if you have one publication in the international journal, that would be really a high level of success. But due to the fact that this was the international team operation and you turned to be successful, we were published quite many times. And this is what we have as of today. And one more important issue as of today is actually the issue related to communication. That is why I'm so grateful to you guys for that special organized group for communication with the use of internet, of YouTube, and some other social networks, etc. It can explain you why it is so important to continue clinical trials. I have shown you my resources. I have shown you my web-based tools. Go on site tv.net. There is a link to YouTube, to our YouTube channel. please visit it. If you don't, it's okay with us. And the final statement I would like to tell you, I wanted actually to briefly get you acknowledged with the activity which is available in Ukraine, which is a highly intelligent level of activity that enables you to resolve quite many problematic issues and challenges, which makes it profitable for patients, for the hospital, for healthcare facility, healthcare system. And I would say this is one of the clearest principles of the general human development. If you do not do that, somebody else will do it. I think we need to catch up with the leading clinics of the world. Thank you. Tanya, Masha, you're ready? Please, Nadia, I can see you will be the first one. Please raise your hand for me to see the scale of the disaster, how many questions we might face. Okay, and we will start from here to that side. Please, ladies, do not forget that a question must be a question. Do you enroll children into clinical trials, or these are only the adults? No, we are the adult clinic. We do not have the mandate, we do not have entitlement for that. But I know there are clinical trials for children. And the clinics, the hospitals that do it, they have actually, they need to stick to some special ethical commission requirements, and there is a need to have some certain experience in that. There is some experience like that in Ukraine. Nadia, tell me please, can the primary healthcare level participate in such clinical trials? I mean, can they become one of the sides to the contract? A very apt question. We don't yet have examples like that in Ukraine. I have not, let's put it this way, I have never heard of that before. But I can tell you that the private clinical practicing physicians in the United States, if they have certain certificate for practice, they can be engaged in such trials. What I mean, actually, you need to comply with all the requirements to the clinical trial, and it is quite possible, I would say. Do you have in your clinic, out of that 100 staff, do you have a professional communications officer who would disperse information about that enormously important work? Not yet, not yet. The answer is not yet. We're trying to do the communication work ourselves as of today, and I see the huge need in that, because we're trying on a rather unexperienced level to do something with the hands of our available staff, and we bump across quite many complications, I would say, in that, and we keep thinking about the possibility to engage communications professionals into that. And we realize that one thing is actually to engage the professional from the communications area, but the other point would be actually he would not be well aware about the clinical related issues. So this would be a kind of a two-way street. Maybe one day I will become a volunteer and go to your clinic. What needs to be included into the primary healthcare level to improve prevention of oncology conditions? What can be included into PhD level activity to improve prevention of oncology? You're talking about something which is not yet available in our country at all. I guess Tatiana from Croatia. Tatiana, I guess. We were here in the conference room. She told you, tell people you don't need, they need to quit smoking, they need to ensure proper BMI index, don't smoke, normal BMI, stick to a rational, normal, healthy way of life, do the jogging, running, jumping, swimming, do not suffer from some nervous stress, etc. And one more important thing is actually you should work with the risk group patients, those patients who do not stick to the healthy way of life, to the common, let's say, approaches to the healthy way of life, and definitely the screening programs like the when mammography needs to be done, colorectal cancer, just like one of the professors. I liked it very much. He was, that was his anniversary, like 50 years old, and he said, though I am now the risk group population who needs to have a personal colonoscopy device, saying that some kind of testing and colonoscopy needs to be done for people of this age. Even some visual screening, because many people say oncomarkers, CT, etc., etc. You just undress your patient, look into his pigmentation, look into his moles. In Sydney, there is an Institute of Cancer, and they have a very special program when they basically undress the person, the patient, they take a photo of his, and then in 1 year when he comes back, then the software automatically tells you what actually has appeared on the body of the patient in 1 year period of time. So what I'm driving at is that be oncologically alerted, so to say, but do not go into cancerophobia, which is not very good, definitely. But do not forget about oncology as the problem. If somebody else comes up now here, let's say cardiologist, that doesn't mean you should think about cardiology only. Three questions, if I may. Do you provide any legal support to the hospitals that agreed to participate in the clinical trial? The answer is no. And you know why? Because as of today, we still do not have our own legal advisor. You might ask, like, how can that be under such volume of work to be done? But let's say our experience when we address the legal advisor, like should you have the problem with VAT tax when you cooperate with the Ukrainian enterprise or the entity, business entity, that would be the representative office in Ukraine. So when we applied to the legal advisor, and he didn't say anything. He was absolutely blank about that, so we had to learn about that information ourselves. So what we investigated is that actually there are some representative offices which are non-for-profit, actually, then you don't need to pay the VAT, the VAT. And then would be who is actually the financial transitory company. The legal advisor is quite blank about that again, actually. What do they actually have to register their business activity in the Ministry of Justice or somewhere else, in the Ministry of Economics, for example? That is why I see that at this point we need to look for some professionals for media support and for legal advice, definitely. And you can actually enroll a patient, a person actually for that, but it will not help. Do you have actually experience in cooperating with large oncology clinics and private onco clinics? We have experience like that. One of private clinics for cancer applied to us. They were the ones who actually initiated basically oncology treatment in Ukraine for such patients, and we share experience with them. Another private clinic applied to us recently, and I was pretty frank, saying them that this was really my honor, but I cannot accept this kind of invitation, though it was quite positive, but because of one reason: not enough time. If you take on that responsibility, you need to be very much committed. I decided to be very much committed in developing my own business, investing into ourselves. It is the best idea actually to invest in yourself in the harsh period of time, because when you look where to steal, where to go, this is what the business trainers say: invest in yourself.
So this type of experience, so we are halfway through. Please fire away. Who is prescribing, so the scheme of treatment? What scheme of treatment? So those patients really who give consent to clinical trials, really. I remove your question because very long answer, very simple. No one really prescribing the guideline for clinical trial, so it's already described. So you give your consent, so you withdraw. So this is really the scheme: A plus B, B plus C, and that's it. Do you have any any algorithm of action planning to really to allow the clinicians not to wait for the clinical trials, but really to enroll into it and actually to be proactive, so as really to attract clinical trials. More than 30 CRO, contract research organizations in Ukraine, Barixay, Quinta, PSI. So please look it up, CRO on the web. If so, please refer to them. So explain your opportunities where you can really perform your clinical trials. Then be on the lookout for the centers really already involved here. So in your field, based on your indications, try really communicating by means of them, trying to offer your service. And number 3, clinicaltrials.gov. Please check out the website, so you must have good knowledge of it. Really, this is the international database, so with more than 200,000 clinical trials. So disease area, so TB. So feel free really to do any search really according to wealth of parameters and check out what's available in this country, what's in the pipeline in this land. So this segment, anyone else willing to ask question? Number 3, Mladena, 1, 2, and then Igor. Can you please tell, after performing successful clinical trials, what's your further actions? So after successful clinical trials performance, so my answer to the question, so what does it mean successful? So that means after statistical processing, so there should be the findings of the clinical trials should be estimated and must be published. So the FDA demands now really all trials to be published. So negative or positive. So 239 research publications, and then you want really to travel to the International Congress, where the findings of these clinical trials are taken out for discussion, so in a professional environment. If this really breakthrough therapy status attributed to this, clinical study, it makes really clinical guideline for the international research, cardiological, and so on. It makes an international standard, and later on, so you have really authorization of this medication in this country or elsewhere, and then the action plan is really. So you have pembrolizumab incoming to a country we don't know really how to handle. So many thousands of dollars, whether it's good really to be used. Can you really give explanation? Yes, of course, we've been really doing it for 3 years already. So free of charge for the benefits of our patients. So it should be widespread, this experience. So multifaceted work in this respect. Can you assess the current status of the Ukrainian clinical research science based on 5 points, based on statistical significance? But very frank. So I'm about really to take out a firearm evidence-based medicine. So something that I've been talking to you about, right? Clinical trials are clinical trials, and I've been making this point already, but yet another science. So it's very hard really for it really to reach statistical significance. So it is next to impossible really so as really to get hold of the database so available in the clinical trial. So all of our research and dissertation thesis makes sense is actually, so they should be followed through so very accurately and so honestly. So because I can see your face is beaming a smile, so if the scientist is telling a lie, he shouldn't be a scientist any longer, he should be politician. So how about, please, which software do you use for data processing, and who's performing it? So the software and clinical data processing is a prerogative of the sponsor company, because this is confidential information, and in the contracts we make this clear point very much. There is really very clinical trials confidential provisions, and this is really prerogative of the sponsor, and all contracts really say that the center must not really publish the findings of the clinical trials based on their sample. So until the international clinical trials goes out to publication, once international is available in publication, you can do really, but you first need to apply 60 days prior to it, so to the company for consideration, and it must give consent. You must give corrections wherever they deem it is possible, and after all discrepancies removed, feel free really to do publication of your scientific research data, so based on the materials of your own clinical trials, so with the permission of the sponsors. So Igor and then Marina. So how about, please, I'm here. So which officials on what level? So where really a barrier to your clinical trials performance? So because we are inside stream, not that many, fortunately. So the highest challenge is actually not enough awareness of our people about this opportunity. Honestly speaking to you, yes. So my quick question, do you have any similar database to clinicaltrials.gov, so in the Ukrainian language? So there is clinical trials in Ukraine. This website is being established. So if you succeed in your Google search, you will be able to find something, because inclusion criteria on our website. So if you manage really to use our site TV website, so there is inclusion criteria, all disease areas and parameters you will be able to identify. So it's been performed once for our own reference. So these sources available for Ukraine, and then Ministry of Health, especially by means of the Health Ministry and by the State Expert Center. So all the programs must have their preliminary approval, and they publish really the clinical trials on the health ministerial websites has been authorized. So you may succeed in this search, and actually there is EMEA's website describing all clinical trials from Europe. So if you give the search, you're bound really to succeed in your search 100%. So how about, good evening, which clinical staging patients are enrolled into study clinical trials? Thank you. In oncology, most clinical trials really on the third and fourth staging in our incidence, in our setting. So 75% of clinical trials, so stage 3 and 4 predominantly. Stage number 1 and 2, whenever you have really immunotherapy program. So cancer immunotherapy program is a breakthrough technology over the last 2 to 3 years. There is a lot more clinical trials when the patients have performed, so total radical treatment, and by means of immunoprophylaxis trying to find out how it is possible to prevent recurrent cancer for the early staging, whether it's possible really to prevent cancer relapse. And when I said that if Ukraine approximates to the benchmarks of US and European clinics, so investigation of phase 1 and 2, Valdebron in Barcelona, so the largest clinical trial center, so 200 clinical trials in stage 1 and 2 and phase 1 and 2. This is where the Ukrainian clinics are striving for. So are we. So who in your histological experts in your clinic, and who do you seek advice from in case of controversial cases? So 3 questions I don't accept. So morphological verification of the diagnosis. So morphologists of the clinics, and whenever we say about the clinical opportunity, so we submit data about it, because without this data you won't be approved, because number one, you should really fill out a special questionnaire with the description of your clinic. So 40 questions. So, and you should really be honest, really, to check out all the questions. And if you qualify, you may be eligible for this clinical trial, morphological service, and in the oncological projects, lots of things really about a molecular screening and personified diagnostics and insight into the parameters that won't happen in 8 years' time in Ukraine. So, according to the rules, there are reference labs abroad. So, for instance, 100 centers involved in clinical trials in Singapore, in Europe, and in Texas, 3 laboratories that handle incoming material for testing. Did I get you right? That you've been long in this business of international clinical guidelines. We don't provide treatment, but we do clinical trials. You don't provide treatment, but you do treatment just because you've been brave enough really to take over responsibility. This is a statement, an affirmation, not a question. I so say no. Nadia, next up, do you have any patients who you refuse really in the clinical trials enrollment, and if so, tell me who? So very important. So screen failure, such so upon screening. So by principle, we can say no to the patient if the patient doesn't qualify eligibility criteria, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. So 10, 15 parameters pro and pretty much the same amount so against. And we need really to carefully put it on file. And if these parameters, if everything, all for it, and then this technology of treatment might be so useful for this particular case if throughout screening, and it happened before 20-25% were turned down for screening, and we said no, and now it is as high as 40% just because personified molecular, so biological genetic factors now under scrutiny. So to a foreign laboratory we sent over so test results. Something wasn't performed in Ukraine, 10-15%, a rare mutation is observed. So a story of pulmonary adenocarcinoma recovery. If you have such non-smoking female patients, and their likelihood of total treatment cure from widespread pulmonary cancer is 95%, but unfortunately 5% of such people. Very disappointing study. So 43 cases were screened and all of them negative. They didn't qualify, but they were enrolled in different programs, but in regular routine practice. It's possible to find some methods, but highly accurate, personified approaches really here are looked for. And my feedback to you is that of a scientist, researcher. So what perspectives in oncology? So all of us are different and same treatments, and this is high time for us really to detect this difference and then knowing how to impact on it. So tell me please how you treat cancer markers, onco markers. So 25, and what's their diagnostic significance? I am positive towards oncomarkers, and especially if you are very literate in using it, because people have been asking me this question very often, and especially from the primary care link. Can we do oncomarkers for everyone across the board and so on? I was giving answer to the question. First, send up this patient to the cancer clinician for screening, because oncomarkers, let us check out the question. So we do screening of 100 cases, so we find out problems in 2 and 98 no. What's the point? So in risk groups oncomarkers, yes, and oncomarkers based on the narrow specialist advice. CA 125 agree, and indication number 3. Those patients with the established diagnosis after treatment kind of recovered now, and they have really say, baseline number of level of oncomarkers. You can do CT scan once every 3 months, or you can say really CT scan will be done if you have an increase of oncomarkers. That is much cheaper. PSA, so antigen. So it's a clear story when it should be performed. So when the prostate gland cancer patient case should be performed correctly. No, stop. Full stop. The time is up. Are you happy really to have such a guest in front of us? Thank you, Katya. Thank you very much. So it's my pleasure really to speak in front of the audience. Thank you very much indeed. So try to...